What's important for co-op governance? What does governance mean anyway? And I'd like to kind of drop back and say that governance is how do you govern your organization? So it gets back to how do you elect those who represent the membership? If you have an organization of 5 different members, all 5 can be members of the governing board. Each one is representation, and your governance are a committee of the whole. But if you have 300 or 500 or 5,000, or as some rural electric co-ops, they may have 15,000 members on the line, then you have to establish some way of representation. And that way of representation is generally done in the co-op world through a democratic vote. So democratic vote is different than most investor-owned businesses who vote their shares. So the more shares you have, the more votes you get, the more control you have in your particular business. I say those companies are a little bit like the golden rule. If you have more gold, you can rule more. But if you don't have the gold, then you don't rule much. But in the co-op world, we're pretty much a democratic vote. So we elect our leaders based on one person, one vote, one member, one vote. Now, if you're a couple that's a member of the organization, then you each share one vote. If you're a larger family, you may have a couple of memberships separate, then you may get 2 votes. Running for the board is you want to be a voice for the members. A co-op is all about its membership, and I like to refer to them as member owners because they all have an equity stake, anywhere from $5,000 to $5,000 or perhaps more in some of the co-ops that I work with. But they all have an equity stake, so they're members and they're owners, and that's an ownership that eventually will come back to them if the co-op, if they live long enough and the co-op is successful, and they will revolve out that equity. So the first piece is having a voice for the members themselves, because members are kind of like, they can't speak for themselves in the board meeting. You have to speak for them. You have to represent them, and that's an important job. You can't have an open forum meeting where you've got 5,000 people in a room and get a lot done. You can hear a lot about the issues and vet the issues, and those are very important meetings to take place, and we call them membership meetings, where you learn about, are we satisfying the needs of the co-op? So 1 is having a voice for the members. 2 is you have to have an important code of conduct. As a leader, as a representative, you have to have impeccable character that goes toward that leadership function. You can't be a member of the co-op. For example, you can't be a member of a credit union if you're convicted of fraud, convicted of pilfering another co-op. But it's important that there is an important code of conduct for those directors, because they need to be held out to a higher standard than the average member. So it's important to carry yourself as a leader in that regard. The third is you have a legal duty as a board to represent the co-op. Now, this is a very interesting point, because as a board member, you can only legally represent the co-op during a board meeting. When you're not in a board meeting, you're a member owner, a customer, if you will, of the co-op, just like any other member owner or customer. The only time you have legal authority is in a board meeting, of a bona fide board meeting itself. And so there you have legal authority, and you have authority to do pretty much anything that the bylaws gives you authority to do at that. There are certain things that require a vote of all of the membership for changes in bylaw structures, for example. But by and large, the bylaws offer a nice display, a way of explaining how the board operates and what authority it actually has. The fourth point I have is you have duty of oversight. So if you can imagine, if a board looks upon its co-op or its members of its co-op much like a parent would look upon a child, it's got oversight responsibility. It can't basically make all the decisions for that individual on a day-to-day basis or an hour-to-hour or minute-by-minute basis, but it has oversight to give guidance and ideas. Just like a board can't stay in meetings 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Generally, co-op board meetings are about once a month. Ideally, they would last about an hour. Sometimes it requires 3 or 4 hours. If you get into technical fields or a lot of things that require a board to get into some nitty-gritty membership-related issues, then it can last. We have one co-op member that I work with that has 2-day board meetings. They get into quite a bit of detail, and it's very important that they spend their time there. But you have to have oversight in the times that you're not, so those who have you given the authority to, a manager, if you will, of the co-op, another person that's involved in managing the business, you've given them the guidelines to operate under. The last point is you need to be loyal to your co-op, have a loyalty base to the business. If other members see that you're not using the co-op, you're using another service, or you're competing with the co-op, then they say, well, it's okay because the leadership of this particular business, it finds it okay to undercut the co-op or go outside the co-op or not use the services of the co-op. They must not be finding it important, whatever the co-op is doing, to be important, so I can too, and you end up cutting your co-ops kind of at the knees. Now, there are some other areas that I think we have to be careful of. I call them structural faults in our governance system. One of the structural faults we have in our governance system is when you have a member owner who's also a customer and they sit on the board of directors, those are competing interests. So it's important that during the board meeting you establish, are we taking a customer approach or a consumer approach, or are we taking a director's approach that has oversight duty or fiduciary responsibilities for all of the member owners. And in those competitive interests, many of our most successful boards have just put that white elephant right onto the table and have, say, one side of the board, you support the customer side, the other side of the board talk about the decisions of how we're going forward with the co-op, and then if necessary, switch sides so that as a board you get perspective for both sides. Because it's very hard for us as individuals to take our customer hat off and put our director board member hat on. We tend to always be customers because it's our money and it's our self-interest that we want to have at the heart of things. The other part of that is, as a owner, as a customer, and also in the board, we can be responsible or listen to or have pre-insight to a lot of decisions that the board can make. For example, if we know that the board is looking for property to build a new office, and we happen to have property that would be just right, we can steer the person or the co-op basically to our own self-interest. And that's a common challenge that we have, to make sure that when those issues come up of discussions with potential conflict of interest or self-interest, or we can guide the co-op to our purposes, use it for our purpose, then that, again, undercuts the significance and the importance of the board. But it's a challenge that we in the co-op world face that a larger investor-owned business would not face, because they wouldn't have those competing interests. When you're developing your first board, or even after you have a board, to establish an effective board, there are a few core things that you have to do. First of all, it's going to be someone who's willing to serve. Because if you're not willing to serve, there's not a lot of money in this, there's not a lot of glory in being on a co-op board. You're not going to make Entertainment Tonight or be a fashion model anywhere by being on the board. In some ways, it's a little bit like being on a school board, because it's an important function that you need to do, but in some cases you really don't have that as much authority, personal authority, as you may think you do. So you have to have someone who is willing to serve, who has the time to serve. Establish up front when the meetings of the board will be held. Some board meetings are always held in the evening. Some board meetings, credit unions, for example, hold most of their board meetings in the afternoon or morning. So if it's a time that's not going to work for you, then you need to find out, when's a good time that all of the board members can get together and have this physical meeting. So as you're going through the process, you need to make sure that they are available and they're willing to serve. They also need to be willing to continue researching the marketplace. A co-op is a business. But a co-op also has a strong personal effect of engagement with each individual member. So you need to understand the association of the business, how the business operates and integrates on their individual